I always knew my marriage wasn't perfect, but I never expected to come home from a brutal 12-hour night shift at the hospital and find my life reduced to a single sheet of paper. It was sitting on the kitchen table, next to an untouched cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. I recognized Doug's handwriting immediately, too neat, too careful, like he had practiced exactly how to break me. I had been a nurse for 15 years, and I had seen people at their absolute worst. I had held the hands of the dying, stitched up wounds, and pulled people back from the brink of death more times than I could count. But nothing, not the blood, not the emergencies, not the pain, prepared me for the words I was about to read. Cassie, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Lauren and I are leaving together. You and I both know we've been over for a long time, and I refuse to spend another year trapped in this version of life you built for yourself. You're too rough, Cassie. Too unrefined. You don't understand the kind of world I want to be part of, the kind of world Lauren has introduced me to. Wealth, prestige, influence. She sees my potential. She encourages it. She wants the best for me, and I need to be with someone who actually believes in what I can accomplish instead of tearing me down. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I won't even ask for understanding. Don't come looking for me. Doug. I read it once, then again, my fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. Too rough. Too unrefined. I swallowed hard, the words feeling like acid in my throat. So, this was it? After 10 years of marriage, after everything we had been through, this was how he chose to leave me? With a letter like a goddamn business resignation? Doug was an ambitious man. I knew that when I married him. It was one of the things that had drawn me to him, the way he talked about success like it was something he could reach out and grab. But his ambition had always been paired with resentment, as if my existence, my refusal to play the perfect, delicate wife, was the one thing holding him back. We fought. A lot. He said I didn't know how to let things go. That I was too blunt, too sharp, too unwilling to compromise. I told him he was arrogant, self-absorbed, and too obsessed with climbing social ladders that weren't even real. But I never thought he would do this. Lauren Kinsley. The name hit me like a slap. Of course, it was her. She was the kind of woman men lost their minds over, ruthlessly beautiful, effortlessly poised, and as rich as she was powerful. She owned an entire chain of high-end fitness clubs, her face on the covers of business magazines, always draped in sleek designer clothes. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone feel a little bit smaller just by existing. And Doug had been drawn to her like a moth to a flame. My blood turned to fire in my veins. I wanted to destroy something. The rage built in my chest so fast it was unbearable, an explosion waiting to happen. My pulse pounded in my ears as I grabbed the nearest object, the heavy antique lamp sitting on the side table. It had been a gift from my late Aunt Vivian, one of the few pieces of her that I had left. I didn't even think. I hurled it across the room. The sound of glass shattering was deafening, but it wasn't the only sound I heard. Beneath the carpet, underneath where the lamp had landed, there was a strange, hollow thud. I froze. Frowning, I stepped forward and pushed the broken pieces of the lamp aside. My fingers ran over the carpet, searching for what I had just heard. There, beneath my touch, I felt it. A ridge. A hard edge where there shouldn't have been one. A panel. I pulled the rug back, my breath catching in my throat. Sure enough, the wooden floor had a hidden metal compartment embedded into it. A small, rusted handle was barely visible against the wood. What the hell? My heart pounded as I reached down and pulled. The panel lifted with a quiet groan, revealing a small safe. Doug and I had lived in this house for years, and I had never known this existed. Why the hell would my aunt have a hidden safe? Tucked neatly beside it was a single envelope, yellowed with age. My name was scrawled across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. Aunt Vivian. I hesitated, suddenly feeling like I had stepped into something much bigger than myself. Aunt Vivian had always been eccentric. A sharp, strange woman who never quite fit into the mold of what people expected. She had never married, never had kids, and never really explained where her money came from. She was the only person in my life who had ever encouraged my sharp edges instead of trying to dull them. With slightly trembling fingers, I tore open the letter. Cassie, if you're reading this, it means life has done what it always does. It's forced you to fight. You've always been a fighter, my girl. And I have no doubt that whatever brought you to this moment has left you angry, maybe even broken. But listen to me carefully. You are not broken. Inside the safe, you'll find a key. And now you have a G*N. Aunt Vivian. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly lowered the letter. I had always known my aunt was hiding something, but this was something else. I turned back to the safe, my pulse thundering. Doug thought he had won. He thought he had walked away with the better life, the better woman. He thought he had left me behind. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. I reached for the safe, determination settling into my bones like steel. This wasn't over. Not even close. My fingers tightened around the key as I knelt in front of the safe, my breath coming in slow, measured inhales. My mind was racing, but my hands were steady. Whatever Aunt Vivian had left me, it had been here all along, hidden beneath my feet while I lived my life, oblivious to the power tucked away in this house. Doug had left me with nothing. Or so he thought. The key slid smoothly into the lock, and with a quiet click, the door swung open. Inside, the safe wasn't filled with stacks of money or family heirlooms. Instead, there was a single velvet pouch, a thick manila envelope, and a small black ledger with an intricate silver clasp. I reached for the envelope first. The moment I turned it over, my pulse quickened. Blackridge Private Banking was printed in elegant script on the front. Blackridge, a name I had seen before in finance articles, always linked to discreet wealth management for the ultra-rich. They weren't just a bank, they were the bank for people who never wanted their money to be traced. I tore it open, my fingers pulling out a stack of documents. As I skimmed through the pages, my heart pounded harder. Property deeds, investment portfolios, stock certificates. Page after page, the numbers stacking up until they blurred together in my vision. At the very bottom of the pile, clipped neatly to a final page, was a bank statement. My stomach flipped. Cassie Miller, beneficiary account. Total balance, $42,850,000. My vision blurred at the edges. I read the number again, then again, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. My aunt, a woman who had spent her life wearing second-hand clothes and clipping grocery coupons, had left me nearly $43 million. I exhaled sharply, the weight of the moment pressing into me from all sides. The house around me, the letter from Doug still sitting on the table, the broken lamp on the floor, it all felt so small compared to this. This wasn't just money. This was power. And Aunt Vivian had hidden it from everyone. I set the documents aside and reached for the black ledger, my fingers brushing over the silver clasp. The leather was soft and worn, like it had been handled 1,000 times. When I flipped it open, I found page after page of meticulous notes written in my aunt's precise handwriting. Investment notes, Kinsley Finance. The moment I saw Lauren Kinsley's name, I **ked in a sharp breath. Lauren, Doug's perfect, polished, sophisticated mistress. I flipped to the next page, my stomach twisting as I realized what I was looking at. Lauren Kinsley's empire wasn't built on solid ground. It was a house of cards, loans stacked on top of loans, hidden debts wrapped up in flashy new projects. And the one thing she was betting everything on? Lake Ridge Resort. I turned the page, my fingers gripping the ledger tightly. Lake Ridge was supposed to be Lauren's crown jewel. She had been working on acquiring the resort for over a year, planning to turn it into an ultra-exclusive fitness retreat for the elite. She needed this deal to go through. Without it, the cracks in her empire would start to show. And the worst part? She didn't own it yet. I did. A sharp, humorless laugh bubbled up in my throat. Doug had walked out of this house thinking he had won. That he was stepping into a world of luxury and power, leaving behind his rough, unrefined wife. But he had no idea. He had no idea that while he was off chasing a fantasy, I was holding the very thing that would make or break his perfect future. I closed the ledger and sat back, my mind spinning through the possibilities. I could ruin them both. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. I spent the next 3 days locked in my house, poring over every document Aunt Vivian had left me. $43 million. Dozens of properties. More stock options than I could count. But none of it excited me as much as the real prize, Lakeridge Resort. Lauren Kinsley had been banking on this deal. Literally. Her company, Kinsley Finance, was stretched thin, drowning in debt that no one had noticed because she had hidden it behind flashy projects and PR stunts. She had over-leveraged everything to secure the financing for the resort, convinced that once it was hers, it would generate millions in profit. She had no idea the land already belonged to me. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Lauren needed this. She had convinced investors, secured sponsorships, and even gotten the local government involved. Backing out now would be a financial catastrophe. And Doug? He had bet everything on her. Leaving me meant leaving behind financial security, stability, and a wife who had been the one actually paying the bills while he chased his fragile little dreams. Lauren had promised him more, promised him the life he always thought he deserved. But what happens when that life comes crashing down? I smiled as I cracked my knuckles over my laptop, pulling up the contact list Aunt Vivian had left me. This wasn't just a pile of money. It was a network, lawyers, accountants, brokers, and private investigators. The kind of people who could make or break a company with a single phone call. Doug wanted prestige? I was about to show him real power. I moved carefully, quietly. If Lauren even suspected I was coming for her, she'd fight back. But she was too distracted, too convinced of her own superiority to notice the small pieces shifting beneath her feet. I started with Kinsley Finance. Lauren thought she was untouchable. She thought her money and reputation made her bulletproof. But what she didn't realize was that when you hide your debts long enough, they eventually find you. I began buying up small stakes in her company through different channels. Nothing major, just enough to get my foot in the door. Enough to start watching. And what I found? Pure gold. Lauren had been funneling money through shell companies, hiding losses behind bogus subsidiaries, and taking out private loans at ridiculous interest rates. She wasn't just struggling. She was bleeding out. With a few anonymous tips to the right financial watchdogs, the pressure started to mount. Investors began asking questions. Auditors were suddenly interested in her books. Banks were hesitating on approving her next round of funding. Lauren didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. But the real bombshell was Lakeridge. Lauren had been telling everyone that the deal was already done, that she had secured the resort, and it was only a matter of time before construction began. She had no idea the land belonged to me. So, I did what any responsible landowner would do. I sent out a press release. Lakeridge Resort announces new ownership and development plans. Within hours, the business world was buzzing. Investors were confused. The media was scrambling for statements. Lauren was being bombarded with questions. She must have nearly lost her mind when she saw the name on the announcement. Cassie Miller, CEO of Lakeridge Holdings. Oh, Lauren. You thought I was too rough? Too unrefined? I hope you like the taste of your own blood, because I was coming for you. Lauren was desperate now. She was running out of options. She couldn't afford to lose Lakeridge, not when so much of her company depended on it. So, I did what she least expected. I sent a message. Let's negotiate. I could practically hear her sigh of relief through the email reply. She suggested dinner, some fancy high-rise restaurant in the city. I agreed. I already knew how this would play out. Lauren would come in confident, thinking she could charm or mid-date me into selling. Doug would be there too, smug and secure in his belief that he had upgraded. But they had no idea what I had planned. By the end of that dinner, Lauren's entire empire would belong to me. And Doug? Doug would finally realize the biggest mistake of his life. The restaurant was exactly what I expected: expensive, pretentious, and designed for people who cared more about appearances than actual substance. The kind of place where the wine list was longer than the menu and the lighting was dim enough to make even the most desperate social climbers look glamorous. I arrived 5 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to watch. From my table near the window, I could see everything. The quiet and asterisk mate booths lined with business moguls and their overdressed companions. The waitstaff, trained to be invisible yet hyper-attentive to the needs of the ultra-rich. The bar where deals were made with hushed voices and firm handshakes. And then, right on cue, Lauren. She walked in like she owned the place, all confidence and designer labels, her perfectly manicured fingers brushing through her sleek, highlighted hair. Doug followed close behind, looking every bit the successful businessman he thought he was, tailored suit, polished shoes, the smug confidence of a man who believed he had traded up. I almost laughed. He was so comfortable, so secure in his new reality. He had no idea that I was about to rip it out from under him. Lauren spotted me first. She didn't falter, didn't hesitate, she was too good for that. Instead, she tilted her chin up and approached like this was her meeting. Like I was just some loose end she needed to tie up before moving forward with her grand plans. "Cassie," she greeted smoothly, sliding into the chair across from me. Doug took the seat beside her, his eyes flicking over me in barely disguised curiosity. I let the silence stretch, taking my time as I sipped my water. Let them wait. Let them feel that first sliver of uncertainty. Doug broke first. "You look," he hesitated, as if he wasn't sure whether to go with good or better than I expected. I ignored him completely. "I assume you know why we're here," I said, my eyes locked on Lauren. She gave a small, practiced smile. "Of course. You have something I want." I tilted my head. "Do I?" A flicker of annoyance passed across her face, but she masked it quickly. "I don't play games, Cassie. You don't belong in the business world, and we both know it. You got lucky inheriting Lakeridge, but that kind of wealth requires strategy. It requires knowledge. You don't have either." Doug leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Selling is the smart move. Lauren has the connections to turn Lakeridge into something bigger than you could ever manage." I smiled. "You're right. I don't have the experience to run a resort." Lauren's lips parted slightly, caught off guard by my easy agreement. Doug's smirk widened. They thought I was about to fold. "But here's the thing," I continued, setting my napkin down carefully. "I don't need experience to know that Kinsley Finance is drowning. I don't need experience to know that you don't have the liquidity to buy Lakeridge and that your investors are already getting nervous." Lauren's smile froze. Doug's smirk disappeared. "Bingo." "You're bluffing," Lauren said, but her voice wasn't quite as steady as before. I pulled out my phone, scrolling for a moment before setting it down on the table. The screen displayed a confidential financial report, one of the many my investigators had compiled on Lauren's rapidly collapsing empire. She glanced down at it, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. I leaned in slightly. "I know about the loans, Lauren. I know about the shell companies. I know about the fake revenue reports you've been feeding your investors to keep them from bailing." I tapped the screen lightly. "And I know that if I go public with this, Kinsley Finance will be in shambles by morning." Doug's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "That's illegal." I finished for him. "Yeah, it is." Lauren's fingers curled around the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "What do you want?" I sat back, crossing my legs leisurely. "Oh, I don't want anything. I just wanted to watch you squirm." Lauren's breathing was sharp, controlled. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much damage control she'd have to do after this dinner. Doug, on the other hand, looked stunned. He had spent years looking down on me, convinced that I was beneath him. And now, he was watching the wife he abandoned systematically dismantle the empire he had sold himself for. It was delicious. I picked up my phone and pressed a button. The screen changed, displaying an email draft. "I have a press release ready to go," I said casually. Once I hit send, every major investor, journalist, and regulatory board will know exactly what's been going on behind the scenes at Kinsley Finance. Lauren's breath hitched. "Cassie," Doug said, leaning forward, panic creeping into his voice. "You don't want to do this." I held up a finger, silencing him instantly. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my tone cool and absolute. You're going to sell me every remaining share of Kinsley Finance at my price. Lauren's nostrils flared. You can't. I can, I cut in. And I will. Unless you'd prefer I hit send instead. Silence. Long, agonizing silence. Then, slowly, Lauren exhaled. Her shoulders sank. The fight drained from her eyes. She had lost. She knew it. I knew it. Doug? He looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. Lauren cleared her throat, voice tight with barely contained anger. Fine. I smiled, picking up my wine glass and taking a slow sip. Smart choice. Lauren shoved her chair back and stood abruptly, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she stormed out of the restaurant. Doug hesitated. He looked between me and Lauren's retreating figure, uncertainty flickering across his face. This was his moment of realization. This was the moment he knew he had chosen the wrong side. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my phone and pressed send. The sound of Doug's breath hitching as his phone buzzed a second later was better than any revenge I could have imagined. Because now, the whole world knew. And by the time the dust settled, Lauren's empire would belong to me. And Doug? Doug would be left with nothing. Lauren's empire collapsed faster than I expected. By the time I left the restaurant, the press was already in a frenzy. Journalists were tearing into Kinsley Finance's fraudulent reports, investors were dumping shares by the hour, and regulators were circling like vultures. And Lauren? She disappeared from the public almost instantly. No statements, no damage control. She knew there was nothing she could say that would stop the avalanche I had set in motion. Doug, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. He called. Twice. Then he texted. We need to talk. Please. I ignored him. He had chosen to walk out of my life, and I had made sure that when he finally looked back, I wouldn't be standing there anymore. Instead, I focused on what came next. Lauren had no choice but to sell her company at my price. Her remaining shares in Kinsley Finance? They were mine now. The same board members who once fawned over her were scrambling to get on my good side, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. And just like that, I had done what Lauren spent years trying to do. I had built an empire. On the ruins of hers. The FBI got involved within a week. Turns out, when you spend years manipulating financial reports, lying to investors, and laundering money through shell corporations, people take notice. Lauren was looking at serious prison time. And Doug? Well, Doug had signed contracts with her company, had handled accounts, had tied himself to every single shady deal she had made. For once in his life, Doug had achieved exactly what he wanted. He was finally on the front page of major newspapers. But not for the reasons he imagined. Disgraced CFO and CEO under investigation for fraud. Financial empire crumbles overnight. Investors demand accountability. From power couple to federal indictment. The fall of Kinsley Finance. Doug called again. I picked up this time. Not because I cared, but because I wanted to hear the defeat in his voice. Cassie, he breathed, and it was wrong how broken he sounded. This wasn't the arrogant man who had left me behind. This wasn't the Doug who had sneered at my so-called lack of refinement. This was a man drowning. Let me guess, I said, my voice cool. Lauren isn't answering your calls? Silence. You did this, he finally said, his voice laced with disbelief. You. What? Fought back. I let out a quiet laugh. You thought you could just walk away, Doug? That you could screw me over and get a perfect life in return. That's not. You called me rough, I continued. Said I wasn't sophisticated enough for the life you wanted. Well, guess what, Doug? Now you don't have that life, and I'm the one sitting at the top. I don't care, I cut him off. Whatever you're about to say. I don't care. His breath hitched, and for a second, I could picture him. Sitting alone. Desperate. Knowing he had lost everything. I smiled. Goodbye, Doug. Then I hung up. Blocked his number. And never looked back. A few weeks later, the final humiliation arrived for Doug. I personally signed his termination papers. The company that he thought would make him rich, that he left me for, was mine now. And Doug? Doug was out of a job, facing federal investigations and completely alone. I wondered how that felt. To go from believing you had everything to realizing you had absolutely nothing. But I wasn't done yet. Because I wasn't just going to tear down what Lauren built. I was going to remake it in my image. The first thing I did after acquiring Kinsley Finance was burn every last trace of Lauren's influence. Her name? Erased. Her legacy? Buried. Her empire? Rebuilt by me. I rebranded the company, restructuring its leadership, eliminating every executive who had been complicit in Lauren's fraud, and installing a team that actually knew how to run a business without lying their way through quarterly reports. The media had a field day with it. The rise of Cassie Miller, from betrayed wife to powerhouse CEO. How one woman took down a financial empire and made it her own. Revenge or genius? The woman who outsmarted an entire industry. I didn't give interviews. I didn't sit down for heartfelt exposés or dramatic tell-alls. I let the work speak for itself. And while the world talked about my rise, I turned my focus to Lake Ridge. Lauren had planned to turn the resort into an elite fitness retreat, a playground for the wealthy, where exclusivity mattered more than actual wellness. I had a different vision. I renovated it, not into a luxury playground, but into a recovery center for women who had been financially destroyed by fraud, scams, and betrayal. Women like me. The ones who had invested in the wrong people. The ones who had been left behind when the men in their lives moved on to something shinier. The ones who had been laughed at, underestimated, discarded. I gave them something Lauren never would have, a second chance. When the doors finally opened, reporters flooded the resort, cameras flashing as they captured the first wave of women stepping into a space designed for them. Lauren had wanted a business. I built a legacy. Doug tried reaching out one last time. A desperate email. No formal greeting. No excuses. Just a single-line plea. Cassie, please. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at the words for a long time. Once, I might have felt pity. Once, I might have responded. Instead, I deleted it, blocked his email, and moved on with my life. Because I didn't just survive what he did to me. I became stronger than he could ever imagine. The day Lauren's final belongings were removed from her former mansion, I stood on the balcony of my new office, a glass of champagne in hand. From my vantage point, I could see the moving trucks hauling away the last remnants of her life, a life she had once believed was untouchable. I took a slow sip, watching the sun set over the city I now owned a piece of. Doug and Lauren had thought they were unstoppable. They thought they had won. But in the end, I was the one left standing.